In a parking lot full of mangled cars behind state police headquarters in Scituate, Dante Bellini's vision is playing out on film. On this chilly evening in late April, hours of preparation and shooting will eventually morph into the latest commercial in a series of public service announcements called The Ripple Effect. The campaign has a focused and ambitious mission: eliminating drunk driving in Rhode Island. There's a good chance you've seen one of the Ripple Effect spots, or its predecessor, Beyond the Crash, since they debuted on television and online nearly 3 years ago. In fact, the commercials have gotten more than 5 million views and picked up 2 regional Emmy Awards along the way. What you may not know is they are funded by federal highway safety money, in what was a major shift in philosophy to combat drunk and distracted driving by the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. More on that later. Bellini, a senior vice president with the Providence public relations and marketing firm, the RDW Group, has had a close relationship with law enforcement and Mothers Against Drunk Driving for years. He said he couldn't find a public service campaign anywhere else that focused on the after effects of drunk driving. He was particularly affected by speaking with veteran state police troopers about their handling of fatal accidents.
Every one of them, regardless of how long they'd been on the job, could vividly recall a specific incident, a specific scene, and it stayed with them, and it stays with them forever.
After the DOT awarded a contract to RDW in 2016, Bellini assembled a team to put together the public service announcements. He has produced hundreds of commercials over a 4-decade career, but wanted this series to have more of a cinematic feel. So he brought on veteran Rhode Island filmmaker Eric Latek, along with Dave Zapatka, a videographer who began in local television and has worked extensively at the network level. Longtime still photographer Richard Kazarian rounded out the team. Bellini told the crew he had watched drunk driving campaigns in other parts of the country and wanted something dramatically different.
None of them left you feeling anything. None of them left you emotionally drained in some respects. And that's where I wanted to go with this, because I wanted this campaign ultimately to be hyper-local and hyper-emotional, because we had the opportunity to do so. We live in a state where everyone knows someone.
And now I'm at the hospital to go and identify her body.
By design, the commercials are uncomfortable to watch. Families whose lives have been affected by a drunk driver, first responders, medical personnel, and state police troopers talk about the profound and indelible mark these moments in time have left on their lives. And the ripple effect runs deep.
When you lose your daughter, you lose your son, you lose your wife or your husband or a loved one, that it not only affects that inner nuclear family, it affects so many people. It affects 50, 60, 70, 80 people immediately.
Rhode Islanders are likely to recognize many of the people who participated in the interviews because their family members were involved in high-profile crashes. From Meg and John DeCubulis, whose 13-year-old daughter Katie was killed in a crash 20 years ago, to Lee and Gary Burke, whose son Ryan was killed by a wrong-way drunk driver. Burke had just finished a shift as a patrolman with the Jamestown Police Department and was off duty when he was killed. Bellini said he was particularly touched by Meg DeCubulis talking about having to identify the body of her daughter in the same hospital where she had given birth to Katie 13 years earlier.
There wasn't one interview where the three of us weren't crying during the interview. The power of the truth of those things were just inescapable.
Latek and Bellini immediately hit it off, and the filmmaker has often been able to transform Bellini's concepts to film. But shooting the video and interviews takes a toll, even for someone who has 2 decades of experience.
I've had to deal with difficult content, but this is another level. To again, where, you know, after documenting people for so many years, I still had to learn how to settle my emotions with when I'm filming and editing. It's heart-wrenching. It affects me not only at that moment, but it's to this day. I talk about it often with people I'm close to. It humbles you in a certain way, grounds you. You know, when you are just in life's moments when you think something is of importance that's really not.
Latex said he was particularly impacted by pictures he saw when shooting a segment with a state police reconstruction team. One photo showed the boot of a woman who had been killed. When Latex went back with a trooper to film the car, he saw the other boot tucked in the wreckage.
And as she goes to the right of the driver's side, I kind of move into the right, and the door's crushed and this car's dilapidated. And there's the other Ugg boot in the back seat. And it just, to this day, it still haunts me in that respect.
That scene was part of the inspiration for the current campaign featuring an 8-year-old girl, played by Bellini's niece, Cara Iafredi, at the Lot State Police call the Boneyard.
You're gonna come right here.
Unlike previous commercials, this one is more abstract, with no interviews.
And the idea was for this little girl, this spirit, looking for what essentially and ultimately is her lost shoe. And we wanted it to hit you in the face that this is what you lose. We literally wanted you to catch your breath. We didn't want to have any interference with the narration, to just reach into your chest, squeeze your heart, and say, holy moly, you know, that's powerful. Our thinking is that she lost her life in a crash, and the car we used, actually, there were 4 people who lost their lives, 2 of whom were children. The reality is she's gone. She's gone, and she's not coming back.
Impaired driving deaths account for over 40% of the deaths in accidents, of the fatalities in accidents. And they're the most easily remedied, preventable, entirely preventable just by making the right decision.
When he took over as DOT director in 2015, Peter Alviti wanted to change the department's approach to drunk driving. Just as the state needed a dramatic plan to fix Rhode Island's roads and bridges, he wanted to include a drunk driving strategy in what would eventually be unveiled as roadworks.
It was also apparent that the typical talking head of somebody in authority telling you not to drive drunk or don't drink and drive was something that was beginning to get lost as a kind of background noise. People heard it, but it didn't necessarily register.
The department reallocated federal highway safety funds and has dedicated more than $3 million between producing and airing the commercials. He said Bellini's execution of the concept has been just what the state was looking for.
And when they pitched that to you the first time, what did you think?
It was immediate. We knew that this was very relatable. It was the message was much clearer than someone just telling you not to drink and drive. And that visually, it was a masterpiece.
That has carried through to the current commercial.
It's visceral, especially with a child, right? We all have an affinity of wanting to protect our children, and so seeing this young girl wandering through this kind of ghostly presence of hulks of steel of past accidents, and the imagery pretty much took me to where I think Dante and his group at RDW wanted our minds to be.
Dante had told me that the Ripple Effect wanted to do a next phase with victim families, and I the second he asked, I said absolutely.
Becky White was Becky Bowman 20 years ago when at the age of 13, she lost her mother Marcia and her best friend Katie DeCubulus in what has become a well-documented tragedy involving a drunk driver. White began talking publicly about the crash just a year later, at the age of 14. Her first talk was at Cherahoe High School.
When high school students hear from me that they lost the loss of a mother or the loss of a best friend is something much more relatable to them. So I knew I had a story that needed to be told. And as painful as it is to tell the story, I'm completely wiped whenever I do share it. It's almost therapeutic for me.
White said the Ripple Effect commercial was more intimate, shot in her home, and it let her go deeper than she has during her public talks.
The one PSA with myself crying that has been on TV was a little odd for me to see. It came on during the Super Bowl, and I remember my husband and I kind of looking at each other like, wow, I'm on TV bawling my eyes out, but I was just sharing what I truly felt and what the crash has done to me and my family.
DOT is planning on a third phase of the series, loosely titled A Call to Action. How friends and family can proactively stop their loved ones from getting in the car impaired. Bellini, who recently retired from RDW, said he'd like to continue with the Ripple Effect campaign and will bid on the contract when the next phase is advertised. It will take the same approach as the first two phases.
I was not looking for anything that was pedestrian. I didn't want anything that was just forgettable. Why spend all this money on media buying, right, if it's going to be forgettable? If people aren't talking about it, sharing it, commenting about it, or having a conversation.
Bellini has received emails, texts, and phone calls from people who said watching the campaign has sparked conversations within their own families.
We've heard, both anecdotally and directly, that that is happening. So, you know, the old cliche, if you save one life, it was worth it. Well, we want to save a lot of lives.
In Scituate, Jim Hummel for the Rhode Island Spotlight.